Welcome back to Ecology Notes. This is part 2. We're talking about food chains, food webs, and energy transfer. So let's take a look here. A good way to think about this is maybe think about a recent meal that you have had. Depending on what you ate, your answers will vary here. For lunch today, let's say you had a chicken sandwich of some sort. So that is the meal. What did your lunch eat for lunch? I'm going to focus in on the chicken part here just to make this a little more interesting because everybody knows chickens are interesting. So I ate chicken. My chicken had to eat something. So whatever chickens eat, they eat the chicken food, which is
And bugs.
Chicken.
bugs and is it bugs, corn, right? Do you feed chickens corn? Do you have chickens at your house, Ripley? Is that
I don't. I want to get some chickens, but I don't have any right now.
you would feed them corn?
I would let them, catch some insects around the yard.
Insects? Is that primarily what they eat? I guess I'm just demonstrating my lack of chicken.
So are they herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores? That's the question.
Well, it sounds like they're eating a combination of plants and animals, which would make them omnivorish. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Yay! There are like the students who have chickens at home and they're just rolling their eyes right now. And now I'm turning into a Hamele-esque long story. All right, so I ate a chicken. That chicken ate some bugs. Those bugs had to eat something. Maybe it was an herbivore kind of bug and it was eating grass. That grass didn't really eat anything. We're down to our producer level if we're using our new terms introduced by Ripley in our last set of notes. So the plants are producers. Where do those plants get the food, the energy for making their food? And the answer is the sun. Yeah. So by tracing my meal back at each step, me to chicken to bug to plant to sun, the energy that I'm running on right now is solar based in its origins, which is what we're going to be taking a look at here through the food chains. So a food chain is what we just did. It's a series of organisms interrelated in their feeding habits and the accompanying transfer of energy. So sun is used by grass to produce its food. The grass is eaten by a grasshopper, which is a consumer. We'll call it a primary consumer because it's the first level. That grasshopper gets eaten by another consumer, a secondary consumer, a frog, which gets eaten by a snake, which is a tertiary consumer. And then we finally got that snake being eaten by a hawk, making it our final consumer in this food chain. So we got a single line of something eating something, eating something, and that's our food chain. Here are the trophic levels. So we kind of talked about those in the last one. Trophic, again, if you think about autotroph, heterotroph, the word is referring to nourishment or food. So we've got our producers. Those are the things that are making their food, their own energy. The primary consumer is the consumer that eats a producer. So in that last example, it was the grasshopper, and here it is again. Oh, there's another one on this slide too I can use. So down here we've got our primary producers. We've got a terrestrial food chain. So on land, we've got a plant that is being eaten by a grasshopper here. So that's our primary. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers. So we're up a level from there. So that is our mouse. It's a carnivore. Tertiary would be third level. Quaternary is fourth level or apex. You don't typically go above that for reasons we'll find out here in a little bit.
And so what's also important as we're moving to the next thing is that organisms can fit into more than one level. So just because the mouse is a secondary consumer in this food chain does not mean that it is always a secondary consumer, because a food chain on its own isn't terribly useful. What we like to do a little bit more kind of bigger picture, better picture of what's going on in ecosystems is combine all the food chains together to form a food web. So a food web is just kind of the total of all of those chains. So if we take all of the organisms living in that ecosystem and we put together all of their food chains of who's eating who and where they're getting their nutrients, we end up with a food web. And so you can see on the right, we've got kind of a desert ecosystem food web, and showing kind of these different interactions of these different organisms. So again, if I kind of trace some food chains, right, it says how many food chains are there in this web. If we start over at kind of the large cactus here, we see that that is eaten by this kind of smaller bird, which is eaten by this larger bird. So there's one food chain in our ecosystem. However, that little bird also eats this other plant. So we could also have a food chain going from the other plant to the small bird to the big bird again, and so on. So we can follow all of these food chains kind of up. And depending on kind of which food chain we're looking at, those trophic levels could be a little bit different. So an organism might be a secondary consumer in one food chain and a tertiary consumer in another. Looking at our food chain, though, Mr. Kemmerer, you don't seem to know too much about ecology or chickens anyways.
About chicken ecology.
Where do all kind of food chains, food webs have to start?
You gotta go all the way back to those producers. Somewhere there has to be a producer that is, well, for most of our examples in this class anyway, capturing energy from the sun, doing photosynthesis, and from there, that energy gets transferred on through the food chain or the food web.
So we notice, yeah, on this desert one, we've got our three kind of producers below, and every single food chain is going to start with one of those organisms, no matter where it kind of goes from there. And we can have food chains for pretty much any ecosystem. So here's another food chain that also includes some of our decomposers, again, that are breaking down dead materials. And we've got some labels here again of primary and secondary and things like that. So all, ecosystems can be broken down into these food webs, which are very useful for seeing how things are going to affect each other. So if I have kind of a change in one population of organisms, let's say maybe the zebra population all of a sudden declines, I can see, oh, well, anything that's eating the zebra, so a hyena or lion, those populations are now maybe going to also decline. If I have a population of the grasses here that are being fed on by zebras, maybe that population is now going to increase. So a food chain is nice, right? It tells us a little story of what's kind of consuming what. But this food web is going to give us a really good picture of how these all interact and change each other. And the ones we're going to be working with are very simplified. So if you tried to actually kind of encompass all of the different interactions that are happening in an ecosystem, you end up with something like this, where this is the North Atlantic Ocean. They, broke all this down, figured all of this out, and it gets a little bit confusing and crazy. So we like to kind of keep them a little bit simpler to be able to see actually what's going on. But in reality, all of these interactions are much, much more complicated.
And that leads us, so these food chains and these food webs are all about how do we get the energy from the producer into the other animals further down the chain or further down the web. And so we're going to look at how that energy gets transferred from one to the next. And a good way to think about that is something called an energy pyramid. Now, the key factor here, and the reason why we call it a pyramid, is energy is lost as it's transferred through the food chain. Okay. Just sitting there right now watching this video, put your hand to your forehead. Does it feel warm? Yeah,
but not too warm.
Not too warm, or you shouldn't be at school. But you're losing energy as heat, right? Some of that energy that you took in from the meals you ate the last couple of days is being used to run around. It's making heat. I'm vibrating air as I'm talking. All these things are causing that energy to get dissipated into other forms. Right? It's not available for the bear that's going to eat me, tomorrow or whatever.
Oh, he's starting to talk about bears again.
Bears again, no.
I should stay away from bears.
Cut him off, stop him.
So energy is used by organisms. So that leads us to the rule of tens. Only about, and this isn't exact, but about 10% of the total energy from one trophic level gets passed on to the next. So if we had, 100 calories in a certain set of plants, only 10 of those would get passed on to that primary consumer that's eating the grasshopper. And so that grasshopper only gets 10 calories from that, and then only 1 calorie goes to the mouse that eats the grasshopper. Okay, and when you do that, you try to lay it out graphically, it looks something like what Mr. Kemmerer is going to talk about next.
A pyramid. Look at that.
Oh.
Wider at the bottom, narrower at the top to show that there is a reduction in the amount of energy available at each of those trophic levels. Remember, those trophic levels, again, producers are making their own food. They're the autotrophs, they're capturing energy from the sun, again, for most of our examples here. That's 100% of the energy entering into the food chain here. From there, our next level up, those primary consumers that are eating the producers, they get about 10% of the energy that was available in the producer level. Then if we go up to our secondary consumers that are eating our primary consumers, they have about 1% of that original 100% at the beginning, or 10% of 10%, if you're following the math on that one. And then all the way at the top, our top consumers, only 0.1% of that original 100% of energy is available there. And before I alluded to this, you don't typically get above that tertiary, quaternary level of consumers just because there's not enough energy left after that level to sustain another level above it. Off to the side here, we've got the decomposers. They're feeding on the dead material at each of those levels. So they're kind of in their own little side category going on there. If we go to, I think that's it for this one. If we go to the next slide then, and we're talking about the sun as being the ultimate source of energy for life on Earth, minus a few chemo autotrophs here and there. It's the energy pyramid is showing the flow of that energy from the sun all the way up through to the top of the energy pyramid, or end of the food chain. So our checkpoint here, we've done a little bit of the math, but see if you can get this. If you started with 1,000 calories at the producer level, the bottom level of the energy pyramid, how many calories are left at the first trophic level? I should say the primary consumer level, the next level up. How many calories are left at the secondary, and how many would be left at a tertiary level? So I'm going to put the Jeopardy music in there. I think Hamele is going to answer what's left at the primary consumer level.
Well, at the primary consumer level, which is the second trophic level, which can be a little bit confusing sometimes. The second level up is the primary consumers, the ones primarily eating the plants. There will only be 10% of 1,000 or 100 calories.
And then Ripley, of those 100 calories, how many would be left at the next level, the secondary consumers?
Okay, so we had 100 coming from the last level, and I think 10% of 100 happens to be 10.
Excellent. And if we went up yet another level, 10% of 10 would leave us with 1 calorie, just 3 levels above our producers. So thinking about it that way can really help us frame up this idea of energy transfer within an ecosystem, which is actually more important to you than you might realize. And I think Ms. Ripley has the example on the next slide to kind of talk about how this is actually impacting the stuff that we eat, the energy available to all humans on planet Earth.
Mm-hmm. So we just kind of finish up talking about calories and things this last unit, nutrition, and how you need to make sure you're getting all of the energy and nutrients you need, and making good choices as far as what food you're eating. And so what you want to be thinking about is, well, how much, bang for your buck you're getting from the foods you're eating. So if we take this example here, we've got 2 acres, and we can use those 2 acres to feed a single cow for a year in Missouri anyways. It might vary by states a little bit depending on the landscape, right? The environment. Okay, that single cow can yield about 440 pounds of meat. If we took our 2 acres though, and instead we decided to produce corn, we grew about 260 bushels of corn on that same patch of land. There's 56 pounds in a bushel. So essentially we get 560 pounds of corn. So on the exact same kind of area of land, we could grow a lot, many more pounds of food. And if we think about this, we're thinking about where kind of on the trophic levels corn versus our cow is going to be, right? So corn is a producer, it's a plant. And so it's getting pretty much all of the energy, right, it needs from the sun. So we're kind of at that producer level that we have 100% of the energy. If we're looking at the cow, we're losing a lot of energy because it's at that next trophic level, right? It's eating the corn or eating the grass, whatever happens to be there. So we're, losing a ton of energy in that transfer up to the next trophic level. So you can think about it the same way of you eating foods, right? If you're eating a plant, versus an animal, you're going to be getting, you know, more of that original energy than you would otherwise. So it kind of translates back to our calories and kind of what you're getting and how much you're going to need to eat of these different things, based on how much energy is like working its way up the food chain.
Actually, and I'm going to make this longer than it needs to be now.
Go
Right? Every student's like, and that was the end, but
They're
no,
like,
there's
yes,
more. It's a
we've done
bonus.
it.
There was just actually because it is important, growing human population on planet Earth, limited capacity for food production. There's obviously some concern about, okay, how do we feed a growing population like this? And one of the ways to do that is for more of us humans to eat at a lower trophic level, because there's just more energy available at that level, rather than, you know, eating meats and things like that. But something else keep an eye on. I've been tempted to buy and try this. Using crickets and other insects as a food source, and they sell, and I haven't brought myself to do it. They sell like cricket brownie or cricket cake mix, and it's the protein
Yeah,
comes
that
from
you can grind it up and turn them into flour.
yeah, so that's something to keep in mind. Really, the only thing that is disgusting about that is just the fact that we grow up not eating crickets. There's nothing wrong with them. In fact, Ripley eats crickets for lunch because she keeps there's a
A
container
tank of them, yeah.
right over there. You've just been picking them up and eating them like popcorn.
You need a little bit of protein to get you going.
Yep.
Now, I've got another long thing I'd like to do, but
Oh my
I'm just going to say, I want you guys to think, why does a grizzly bear need
Hey, the bear.
100 square miles of land to support it, whereas a cow only needs 2 acres? I'm just going to leave it there, let you think about it, and shut up so I don't make this any longer.
All right.
Good?
Are we done?
On that note, we will catch you in the next version of Notes, which hopefully will be a little bit shorter. I don't know.
Maybe.
If we stop talking about bears.
I'm never going to stop anymore.